Всім добрий вечір.
On behalf of the brave.
On behalf of every father and every mother.
Wings for freedom. On behalf of our
Warriors.
And paves the way for a new history.
Dobry вечер. Good evening, afternoon, or morning, wherever you're tuning in from. Welcome back to Tochnyi. Tochnyi is a podcast on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and other platforms. Please take a look at our YouTube index or Twitter timeline to see our latest and past work from contributors such as German aid to Ukraine and many more. We also run an interview series named Tochnyi Talks, which has featured people such as Michael Weiss, Dr. Maro Gili, Dr. Ian Garner, and Sergei Sumleny. Tochnyi is, of course, also a research group with recent work on FPV drones, work led by Daniela in collaboration with Andrew Perpetua and Gick, getting published in this week's Economist. So we certainly recommend this week's Economist for further reading on that. If you want to stay abreast of the work we do here at Tochnyi, which is aimed at bringing accurate information on this war and informing Ukrainian supporters as best as we can, please follow and share us on YouTube, Twitter X, subscribe and press the like button on YouTube, and please share the content which interests you. This week, on the 717th day since the start of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, we are privileged to be joined by filmmaker Ben Goldhagen, whose recent film To the Zero Line records the lives of all Ukrainians as they endure this war. During the interview, please ask any questions you have for Ben. Questions on any part of the film which you see live, they will be answered. Be these questions about the small details you see in a particular scene, or questions more thematic, Ben is here to answer your questions for you live as his film rolls. After this segment, we will be having Mr. John Ridge, who will be talking to Joseph Thompson about the Shahed leaks, those being the recently leaked documents about Russian manufacturing of Shahed drones. So please do stay tuned for that enticing segment. I think that's rather enough of my introduction. Ben Goldhagen, welcome to Tochnyi. It's good to have you here.
Hey, Jonathan, thanks for the invite. I'm really excited. This is the first time that someone's going to be rolling film and talking about it. I usually just talk with no visual questions or aids. So I really appreciate what you do at Tochnyi to make this happen.
Thank you, Ben. And just while we get... as the audience can see the poster for your film in front of you, can you briefly tell us what motivated you to make this film, and when did filming on it begin?
Well, what motivated me was something. It was really in the first days of the full-scale invasion. My father's a survivor of the Holocaust, and he endured it in what's now Ukraine, in Chernovitzy. At the time, it was called Chernovitz, and I had made some films about that period, and so I was really familiar with the issue of survivors. And then my brother and he are well known in the field of genocide studies. And I mean, it's very well known. And so it all came together. And when the war started, I realized that we were all talking. This is what we talk about in my family. We were talking about what the goal of the goal of the war was for the invaders, and it was pretty clear to us at that time, even after the first 3 days, of the Kyiv invasion, the attack on Kyiv, that this was an eliminationist campaign, which most people call genocide. And I didn't want to just stand by and watch this happen from a distance, I knew that it was important for people to step up, because people stood up to help my father and his family survive, though most people died. And so that's what motivated me. I wanted the world to know what's happening, and I felt that because of the experience and certain talents we have, that I could help. And this what got me to do it. And so really started on the project from the very, very start of the war, of the full scale invasion.
Thank you, Ben. Ukrainian stories, their testimony of events, form the nexus of your film. So I just thought that just while we bring in, just going to see if we can get Shaggy Fella up here, actually, if he's here. All right, we'll give him a minute. Yeah, the nexus of your film is that Ukrainian story from that you record, Ben. Could you just as we play the beginning here, showing the Earth Bridge and Ukrainians moving across it. Could you tell us why you decided to start with this particular scene here?
Yeah, should I talk right now while this is going?
Yeah, please do.
Okay, so we won't have the music then. All right. Yeah, this is Irpin Bridge. This is the very beginning of the war, and so I thought it was two things. One is that the film the film takes place during the course of a year and through the seasons, and this is really the very, very start of the invasion, or the response to the invasion. And Irpin Bridge appears later in the film, and I wanted to get a sense of mobilization of people, of the individuals, because here, you have the people in peril, and then you have the response of the soldiers, and this whole sequence is a little bit dreamy, especially when you have the music, and it's an allusion to Apocalypse, the beginning of Apocalypse Now, where there are helicopters going around, the sound of helicopters, and you get this sort of like dreamy sense of war. And so that was I always wanted to create that sort of like dreamlike effect when you look at the water, and the bodies in slow motion and double exposures, because war is really sort of surrealistic pretty much at all times, and that's how the feeling of that came across, and wanted to get that sense of peril without, and there's no voiceover in any of the film, and I wanted people to experience what it's like, what it's like, even though you're not there, of people crossing the water or marching. And in this case, then you come to New York, where this doctor you don't know what she's doing exactly, but it's a different world. And I wanted to create that distance, that difference between, right from the start, between what's going on in Ukraine, which is obviously perilous and absolutely dangerous, to this really beautiful setting in New York, of a completely different world happening simultaneously. Because a lot of times in films that have to do with war or bad things, you're like in one environment or the other environment, or you cross over. But here I want to create this kind of parallel world, parallel worlds between the two, which even makes it. And then we go back to Ukraine after this, and the music, if you hear it, if you were to hear it, the music actually starts here. It's a tango, and what happens is that it then continues into the next scene, which is in Lviv, because I wanted to make that connection, so it's a musical connection between the two worlds, because this doctor then ends up in Lviv later on, and so that's how, and then for the first 5 minutes of the film, you're just experiencing what's going on. There's no explanation of anything. That was actually very lucky how that showed up. We didn't have any control of the flagpole, and so here the music continues in order to make that connection, because later she shows up in Lviv, and one of the things I want to do in the film is I want people in the U.S. and U.K. and EU to really feel connected to the people in Ukraine. This is not a film about this is not a film about just some far off place where bad things happen. Um, it's designed in a way so that people who are not there can relate very closely to the people who are there and what they're going through. And so that's why this whole beginning was built this way. Um, it has the familiar and then the unfamiliar, and as the film goes on, it becomes more and more distant from most people in the West's experiences.
Thanks, Ben. I think one of the things that struck me about this part of the film is this house and the way that you try to convey the experience of Ukrainians and the experience of people outside of Ukraine. Ukraine has many allies across the world, but when I saw this house and I thought, well, just like you have this parallel with the Irpin Bridge at the beginning, where the Irpin Bridge is going to be preserved as a war memorial. So it's going to be permanently left destroyed, just like Orodor Suglan. And you have this house here as well, which, Ukraine has undergone, as we heard from colleague Tochnyi Weekly recently, Ukraine has undergone significant reconstruction despite this war. And it just struck me that this house is, in the state that the Russians put it in. So these kind of elements, kind of consanguineous to the European, the French in this case, experience during World War II. Was this intentional? Did you mean to make this connection, or did you just decide to choose this particular building because of what it evoked and the story that it tells of the mark that the Russians left on the Ukrainian landscape?
Yeah, well, it's many things. First of all, this is not a normal documentary in that sense. Nothing, very little is explained in it. You have to experience it, and there are lots of layers. It's much more. It's good you asked that question, because it's more cinematic than it is like a news report, which most documentaries are basically sort of like news reports. This is something. This is something that you're right, leaves room for interpretation and also exploration. By the way, before I answer your question, the Irpin Bridge is in this as a memorial later in the film, and that's we don't explain it as that, and people can point it out. But when you go later in the film, there's this bridge, and it's when Yarko, the driver, is driving towards the east, and you see I don't know what minute mark it is, but you can see the memorial, and it's later on, and then as far as this goes, yeah, this is actually this is actually a car repair shop that was hit. No one really knows why this was hit. People think it was a mistake because who the hell knows why this was chosen. But yeah, this is very much the reason why this. I mean, we go into usually when you see shots of destroyed buildings in this war. Other words, they don't really explore it quite this way, and and then it is like it reminded me a little bit of the footage I've seen of London or France or Berlin in decay, after the war or after bombing. So yeah, it's to make that connection again and like this is with other places. And so if you have the memory of or knowledge of these other places, like you mentioned, then you then you can make that connection, and which you did.
But I'm just going to do a quick sound check on another guest we have here today, Shaggy Fella. Can you give us a quick mic check? Shaggy, if you look at the bottom of your screen, the button on the left, that yeah, you should be able to unmute. Okay.
Does he need to turn? I had the problem with I had to turn on the video and then turn it off or something like that in order for the mic to work.
We'll get our we'll get our tech team on that, Shaggy and Ben, and bring you in as soon as possible. Can I ask you about this this chap here, Ben? His name is Saman, isn't it? Saman?
Yes.
How
Well,
did you,
I'm sorry.
how did you come about meeting him?
Oh well, Simon. At the beginning, we filmed him very close to the beginning of. He was injured early in the war, after the full scale invasion, and what happened is that he used to hang out. The woman, basically everybody in the film knows somebody in the film somehow through some kind of connection, because especially during the war in Ukraine, you have your circle. I'll just tell you, you kind of like you can't really trust everybody because you don't know who's who, and there's spies everywhere. So your people know their circle of friends or a circle of relations that they've developed, that are sort of like your circle of trust. um, and Simon is part, and so and my circle of trust. I didn't know anybody starting out, pretty much. I had to develop connections and develop friendships and develop credibility. And as that went along, as you know, I talk to one person or film one person, then they would realize, hey, this guy's okay, he's not so bad, or this crew, because it's a group of people. And then it would be like, oh yeah, I know somebody who can do this, or I know somebody that does this. Do you want to film them, kind of thing? And then they would. At first, I had to go seeking, and eventually, people were coming to us to like say, hey, because they realized that this film was going to be something that would be seen on the outside of Ukraine, to portray Ukraine, and people really want to get involved in the project. And so when it came to Simon, what happened? The first woman that you see, the one that worked for BBC, she worked in this bar. She was manager of a bar, and Simon got wounded, and he used to go to the bar, and so he was, just a regular. And I said, I need to meet some soldiers. I knew no soldiers, I didn't know anybody really. And and so she said, well, I know this guy. He wants, he's been wounded. Maybe he'll talk to you. And what happened was that I met him the day before, or 2 days before, and we met in a cafe somewhere, and he was really articulate and interesting guy, interesting things. And so I said, yeah, and we talked for a long time. And so we arranged to meet to film this. And then, and we did, and then we filmed it. We found a place to film it. And then I found out after it was done that she told me he didn't want to do it. He had decided that that morning he wasn't going to go on camera, and she had to plead with him to do, to do the shoot. And she didn't want to tell me, because I think he was late that day, that we were going to film. And then, but I had no idea that he was skittish. And then he, to go go into how things work out. He's in the 24th Brigade, and what happened? And the Christmas in Bakhmut is at with the 24th Brigade, and this is how sort of like the connections work. Is we became friendly, and then I was going to film a rave, later, because there were these raves that go on. The raves that go on, they're like get-togethers, all different kinds of things. Where like the cover charge, or to get into the rave, you pay a certain amount of money, and that money is for fundraising for a unit or something like that. And so Simon, uh, Simon's. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh,
So
I was going to ask you a question. No, please finish about Simon.
and I'll be real quick with this one. With this, so he's in 24th Brigade, and I saw him at the rave, and he did not have that brace on his arm, and I thought, wow, this is fantastic. I said to him, fantastic, you're healed, you're better, and and he said he was going back to fight, and actually he's a drone guy now, and and he said, I hear you can get some tourniquets, kind of thing, because we had already gotten tourniquets for somebody else. We had come with some tourniquets, and so one thing led to another, which then I got a message from a medic in his brigade that they said, yeah, we could use some tourniquets, and then we got them some tourniquets, and one thing led to another, which gave us credibility with the 24th Brigade. And at some point, I wanted to go to the front, and we had developed this relationship with them. And it was like, yeah, why don't you come? It's well, you can film us, kind of thing. And that's pretty much how almost everything you see is one thing after another leads to another. But you have to spend time with people, and you have to develop something more than just a journalist coming in and sticking a camera and a microphone in someone's face, which is what happens most of the time when people make films in these kinds of environments. And then you get the news, but then you get combat, and I'm much more interested in people, what people's lives.
Thank you, Ben. That's fascinating. The 155 Bordana that we see in front of us. I think the only prototype of that was was they it was ordered to be destroyed, if I recall correctly, on the 24th of February 2022. But Ukraine began its own manufacturing process of this. Ukraine has shown this incredible adaptability to the horrific onslaught of the full-scale invasion that is faced. But these human stories, the suffering of its people, you convey in this film. And I'd like, if possible, if we could turn to the interview with the pediatrician.
Oh, yeah.
I have just a couple of questions about Dr.
Taras.
Taras.
We call him Taras. That's his first name. I can't pronounce his last name, but I can say Taras.
Just before that, we have, I think it's Shia, one of the many adults.
Yeah, that's Shia.
Young adults, yeah. She's become one of the many adults that have learned to become medics to rescue lives. Yeah, so I think for the audience, we'll just give the background of, is it Veronica, the name of the girl?
Yeah, Veronica. If you haven't seen the film, what happened was that we in the children's hospital. There were we were walking around because what got us to the children's hospital was the doctor in New York was bringing medicine to Ukraine, and we were looking for a place to film for her to deliver the medicine, and it turned out to be this place, this hospital. And so while we were there, sort of scouting these doctors, she's very instrumental in this, the one who's there. She said, we have other things going on here besides just we can take medicine. We also have all these cases. We have all these children that came, and they have an evacuation train at that point that came from the east with all these wounded kids, and they'd end up here, quite a number of them. And then Veronica was an interesting, and it's really terrible because here you are, a filmmaker, and you kind of have your pick of misery, if you want to think of it that way. And these kids are really hurt in one way or another, and This story was really, really interesting because of how terrible it really is. That she was in Volodahar, and what happened was that there was a missile attack, and the adults, if you haven't seen the film, the adults jumped on top of her, and the missile hit, and all the adults on top of her were killed, and she's the only survivor. And but she was wounded. She had shrapnel in her head, and she was brought here, and she was in. They talk about her psychological state, that she was really afraid. She couldn't even be touched. And then her parents were dead. Before that, her father was in the territorial defense. The mother died. The grandparents died, and so she's an orphan. And you and she's an orphan, and they have to take care of her. And she still had what is explained here is that she has to go through numerous operations because the material in her head is dangerous, and they couldn't take it all out at once. And so at this point, they had got most of it out, and there was still one operation they felt that was left. What is not in this part of the film, because it just made this scene too long, is the problem of her getting adopted, which I'll just mention this here. I wanted to include it. We had it in the film until like the week before we released the film, but it just made this whole sequence too long. Is that because she doesn't have parents, and there's no death certificate for the parents, she could not be put up for adoption, because to be adopted you have to be an orphan, but she's not officially an orphan. And this is a problem for them, because they couldn't put her up for adoption. She couldn't, so they found a foster home for her. And so there's this whole bureaucratic need uh, to officially have her parents dead, um, in order for her to be adopted.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you
Yeah.
for bringing that story to in your film and the background to it to us. Can I ask you a question about this gentleman in front of you, the pediatrician?
Yeah,
Um,
sure.
he looks absolutely shattered, and I'm just wondering what challenges did you face in interviewing him? He's understandably tired. How challenging was it to get him to sit down with you for 5 minutes and tell you his story?
Um, you know, I will say that we work pretty well with people, and as far as people's schedules go, kind of thing, because we have time. We're n- we're not rushing from, like, we don't have deadlines, like, per se. And so that day was a really difficult day as far as scheduling goes. But uh, we made it work. We made it work. We worked around his schedule. He was really, really busy that day. We were late, but he also felt it was really important to tell this story of this girl and what they did. And so I can say that just a lot of cooperation. I really feel very fortunate that people want to be part of this project. We really consider it a project. So it wasn't really, I can't really say that it was difficult. We're all working together, sort of like me being on the podcast with you. Um, there are technical things you have to deal with and timing things you have to deal with. But in reality, we're all working on for the same purpose with the same goals. And so so it's not a normal kind of situation when it comes to filming. Just like when it comes to you putting together your broadcast for Touchnyi, um, everyone kind of really wants success for each other, and that's the experience that we had with Dr. Taraz and the other people.
Thank you, Ben. Just one question from the audience that we've got. What cameras and equipment uh, or drones did you use during this film?
Yeah, I'm glad to answer this kind of question, and I hope it doesn't bore other people, but I love to talk about the technical side because it's really hard to get information on how to do this. Basically, bottom line is we shot in 6K because it makes editing much easier. The final film is going to be 4K, and it makes editing much easier to shoot in 6K. If you know what I'm talking about, I won't go into detail, but that means it requires a whole lot of stuff, and I wanted a certain amount of quality of the image. So we used and so primarily we used when we were shooting that way, we were using the Blackmagic Compact 6K. It does not have autofocus, which is unfortunate, but that's what we had. And we use, generally speaking, Canon lenses because they really give you a beautiful bokeh, which is like the background, that softness that you can have, really nice focus. We also use the Canon. I'm sorry. This one was shot with a Canon camera. It was a 4K camera, but it makes editing more difficult. And then we ended up bringing lights around, and tube lights, tube LEDs, and other kinds of LED lights. We always had a generator at some point when the electricity was difficult, when it got difficult. And then this was handheld. We stopped with handheld most of the time, shot with tripods. I mean, we had a really good rig eventually. And then with drones, um, generally speaking, the Mavic drones, Mavic 3, I think was the one at the time. And we also shot with GoPros, GoPro Hero 10, and then other people had other GoPros, like GoPro 10 at the time, I think that was the one. And then there were just other GoPros that we used. We used also Sony 7s, the whatever, that because we was shooting sometimes with many cameras, like with 5 cameras sometimes for some things, but always at some point with this we only had 1 camera. We were always shooting 2 or 3 cameras at some point because we just wanted the coverage. So it required, in order to get this kind of quality, we really needed to almost be like an independent feature rather than just a normal documentary. And then we had, sorry, go ahead.
Just going to give Shaggy another mic check, if that's okay. He's testing. Okay, we'll continue to work towards getting that sorted. These women that we can see on the screen in front of us here, Ben, can you speak about the value that you saw that these women felt they had in their roles, and what other supports you learned that this group in particular provides to the ZSU?
Well, this group, this group is, it's a church group, and part of a normal church activity before war is to do service, and so they see, so to do service, so they see 2 things. They see themselves twofold. One is to help in the war effort, but also help in their role as Christians, to do service for the community. And so you hear them speak of service, and you say, Father Freden, does service. And this is really part, this is really part of the culture. Obviously, other people in the film and other people in Ukraine have other motivations as well, but they are very motivated by their Christian faith, to do service to the community. And in this case, she explains, and we have all of these other things that during the war, at the beginning, nobody knew what to do. This is like what I wanted in this, what you were saying comes across here, is at the beginning of the war, no one was ready for a war, really. I mean, if you're just living your life and, going to school or or you're a lumberjack or whatever it is, you don't know anything about it. You don't know how to make a cocktail. Or make camo nets. And so she explains at the very beginning of the war, people were just they wanted to do something. So there was this whole self-mobilization going on. And that's what she's talking about here. in this way. And then you have to figure out where, if there's a missile, where do I go? I mean, like if you think right now, wherever you are outside of Ukraine, if someone said, if you in your own mind, it's like, okay, there's an attack down, there's an attack in the town next door, and there are going to be missiles coming at me. What am I going to do today? And that's really what she's describing, the experience. And then this is, and then the Molotov cocktail and the camo nets are two of the activities. And then you saw the sandwich making.
Thank you, Ben. This group and the camonet making here. I'd like to skip actually, if we could, to the scene of the choir that you filmed. They sing the famous evocative Leonard Cohen song "Hallelujah." This is a country at war, but here's an example of members of a community brought together. I'd like, if we could, just to just take a quick look at this scene. I know our audience will be familiar with this, and we can come back to this, any of this at any time. But could you speak to the role that why you chose to film this particular scene with this choir? What are the retrospective thoughts you have on what you saw and what you filmed?
Are you going to play the choir or?
Yes, we're just getting to that. This is right before. Here we go.
Yeah. I don't know if I should talk or if you. I'll just talk. Well, what happened? What happened with this? It happened almost by accident. What happened? We were we had been filming in the church, and we filmed the priest, and he said, we have these choir, and we had filmed another choir. They have 3 choirs, and we'd filmed another choir. It was the youth choir. And he said, you can't just film the youth choir. You need to film this choir too. They have 2 adult choirs. And so I thought, we need some music for the film, but that wasn't really what was happening at that time. And we were really, really busy. This was a scheduling issue because this was at night. They could only rehearse at night because people are doing whatever else they do during the day. And so we had to figure out how to get all of this done. And also at that time, it was the electricity wasn't so. The electricity was really iffy because the Russians were hitting power plants. And we actually, in this particular scene, we did not have electricity. I don't know if we used a generator here, or I think the electricity went back on because, and so there were all of these issues to actually get this, to have this evening happen. And they had to also be, just so you know what it's like, they also had to be out of there because there was curfew. At that time, I don't remember what time the curfew was, but it was like 8:30 or 9 o'clock at night. So we had this like really narrow window. The electricity went off, and they had to sing, and they were rehearsed. By the way, they rehearsed for Sunday because they sing on Sunday. This was the rehearsal during the week, and then they were going to get out of there because of the curfew. And we have to set up, and they have to wait for us to set up. So this is like kind of the tension that, I mean, we were good at it, I have to say, to even just make it happen, and you asked about how people, scheduling things. This is kind of normal for like how we had to deal, how both we as the crew and also they as the people we were going to be part of it, had to work together in order to make anything happen. And then they sang all kinds of stuff that day. And I didn't know that they were going to sing Hallelujah, but this is, and I didn't know that they were going to sing it. And then I realized, or someone told me they were going to sing it, and we had to do it in one take because of the scheduling issue. They couldn't go back. They were practicing for Sunday, and they couldn't just keep doing the same song again and again for us because they had to finish their rehearsal before
This
curfew.
is this is their practice. They didn't. You film them during their practice, and not the other way around. They weren't performing for you.
No, correct. We were filming during
I,
during the rehearsal, and so then what happened with this is we had to do it in one take because there was just no more time. And in order to, and it's really pretty amazing that we got one take because we did it really beautifully shot. I mean, all of those angles, the cuts, the pans, and
and you shoot.
it worked out really well.
If I may interrupt you, sorry to interrupt you. You shoot from an eye line perspective quite a lot in this film during the funeral later on to give that sense that the viewer is in the crowd at the funeral. Here you're coming at it slightly from above, a little bit like your eye line with the conductor, and I think this gives people it conveys. We get an impression of what a conductor does, why they're important. We'll have a watch of this actually and just see how he brings out the tenor line later on, because I quite like how he gives the sopranos, altos, tenors, bass their own kind of solo during each. So if it's okay, we'll just watch a couple of minutes of this.
I would like, and I'd like to just add, I'd love that, and I just want to add one thing. Why this song? Hallelujah, because again, I wanted the connection to be between people in the West or outside of Ukraine, and this is such a famous song, and because it's in Ukrainian, people outside of Ukraine, we could have had them sing some song that no one ever heard of, but it creates that real strong connection and a real strong understanding of how close we are to them and how close they are to people in the West, which is why this song was chosen.
All right, let's have a listen.
Під'ясне
deserve a voice in this war, Ben, and you certainly gave that, enabled them to have that there. Thank you. We're going to move on, if it's possible, to the scene involving the funeral and quite a lot of things. You have so many things in this film. You have a birth, you have a funeral, you have a wedding, you have a cycle of life. And I'm just wondering why you chose to put all of this into one film.
Because it's about life. I think all great war films are about more than just a single war. And it's really about life itself. And that's what war brings out, and so it's a few things in this case. One is that I wanted to show not just war, I wanted to show the life of people. And again, it's for people in the outside of Ukraine to be able to relate to people inside Ukraine. And so what's more relatable than all of the activities of life that we all share? It's the humanity in all of us. So birth is very common to us all, same with weddings, and you can easily see yourself. And this is what happens. People have come to me many times, like with the birth. I mean, and said, even some women have come to me and said, like, I've had a cesarean section. I didn't know it was like that, kind of thing. Or the funeral. Many people have said that reminds me of when my grandmother died, or like my son died, sort of thing. So this is a way of connecting people all around the world. The universality of the experience of people in Ukraine is the same as everywhere else. And so you have to you can't just talk about it like, here is the cycle of life. You have to experience it. That's what art is, and that's why it's in there.
I think this scene with the Greek Orthodox priest, unless I'm mistaken,
It's Roman.
Roman Orthodox. Thank you. He said some words there which are perhaps missing in terms of ecclesiastical advice that we hear outside of Ukraine. We hear things like pray for peace, which a lot of people do, but this man is very specific. This man says this war is a war between good and evil, and I was struck by this scene. What how devout his congregation are, and the way that you juxtapose this scene with we'll just wait until he says it. I think it's round about this moment here.
It's a little bit before. You mean when he says genocide?
Yeah, it's a bit before, is it?
No, actually, I don't know. I have to. I'm not exactly sure myself at this moment.
There's a lot happening in this scene.
Yeah, there is.
Can you tell us what these people are doing?
Well, overall, this scene takes an inspiration from The Godfather, Francis Coppola's movie. In it, and that's what really got me thinking about this altogether. There are two things. One thing I mentioned before is that in war, the good things and the bad things happen. They're all mixed together, and that's the beginning of the film. That first sequence, that the superimposition that we talked about, and this is another example, and also the Christmas, Carol of the Bells is another example of how you have what's sort of normal in a way outside of war with the terrible things that happen in war. And so that theme goes throughout the movie, and so that's also with the Christmas in Bakhmut. It's Christmas, but it's in a terrible, screwed up place in Bakhmut. And so in this case, what inspired this was the scene in Godfather, which is known as the baptism scene, and it's when Sonny Corleone has the baptism of his child. It's a absolutely great scene, and it's intercut with the assassination of his rivals. And so you have this innocent little child with the priest, and you have this horrific violence. It's a very famous scene in filmmaking and cinema. And that inspired me with this scene. And so we called this the baptism scene. Everybody who was working on the film knew the baptism scene. We studied it. And so that was the inspiration behind, I have to say, that's the inspiration behind it. And then it was a question, how do you do it? And I didn't want to make a carbon copy of that scene. I wanted it to be our own sort of thing. And filmmakers like to make illusions, and so that's what that's sort of the structure of it. And I chose the and there were different ways of dealing with it, and so it chose something very intimate, which was the with the intercutting part, which was the taking of the sacrament. And you have taking the which you see it from an angle that you never ever see, someone taking the sacrament unless you're the priest, which is like into the mouth of the person. And so it has that intimacy of the people with the violence of the boxing.
And you juxtapose this, Ben, with this scene of the spark.
Jonathan?
Oh, hey, Shag.
Our guest has joined. Shaggy, welcome.
Oh, finally, my microphone works.
It's great to have you here, Shaggy. Welcome. Do you have any questions? Please feel free to jump in on any questions you've. Thanks to our tech support for getting you up here. Do you have any questions for Ben on what you've seen so far, the film in general?
Yeah, you just carry on with what you were just talking about. Then I'll come in with my question if you want.
Yeah, sure. If it's okay, I'd like us to this scene here, which contains quite an interesting mix of things. So we have an interview.
Yeah. By the way, that's Taraz, the guy doing the interview. He is one of our camera guys. He's a fantastic camera guy, and he filmed he was one of the camera guys who filmed filmed all through a lot of it. But like that scene with the chorus that we just saw. So many of the guys are in our. Many people working in the film actually have little cameos. I don't know if I should have told you that. It might have ruined the illusion, but
Not at all. Not at all. I'm particularly struck by, I think I asked you this at the sound check, didn't I? This esoteric moon at a waxing crescent, the clouds passing by under it, over the heads of Ukrainians. I'm just going to skip to that if that's okay. And we have the unwavering masonry of the church that comes into shot. And I'd like there, first of all, if it's not too bold of me to say, Ben, we always have a picture of the week on Tochnyi, and we usually do this at the end of the show. If it's all right with you, I'd like this to be Tochny's picture of this week.
By all means, any picture you want is all right with me.
This is extraordinarily effective. And why did you choose this shot, Ben? And what does it evoke for you?
Well, this goes again back to the theme of the universality of our experience all around the world with the people of Ukraine and amongst each other. Is the moon is the same everywhere you go, and so everywhere on Earth you look up and you see the moon, and it's the same moon. And I wanted, just like the birth and just like the funeral and the other scenes, we also have nature in it. And we behind this scene that we just saw with the car guy, there's apples on the apple tree. And so this is to connect that bond of humanity that we all share. And because it's Christmas, to many people who Christmas means something, it's easy to identify with. It just, I mean, it's just like your life. If you're in, if you're in London, or if you're in Los Angeles, or if you're in Berlin, or wherever you are, this could be your neighborhood. And that's how we get into the sequence. And as it goes on, you see that it becomes more and more Ukraine, which is, and more and more like the war, because then you don't have, so you're sort of lured into the familiar. The familiar lures you in, and then it becomes it's this mix again of the normal with the with I think of war that way.
And you play Mikola led on, which is famous Carol of the Bells.
Yeah, which is, and there's a great deal of Ukrainian culture in this film, and so for those who know or don't know, this is a well-known, again, this is a very well-known song in the canon of in the West of Christmas carols, and it was Ukrainian composer.
You've got that wonderful Orthodox bass at the end there. I think our guest Shaggy has a question on the previous scene, the Mayor of Lviv. So it's my pleasure to bring that in. If I don't skip past it first. Yeah. Shaggy, welcome.
Thank
Please,
you.
Over to
Thank you. Yeah, cheers. No, I love that music as well, Carol of the Bells. I might have another question about that actually after this, after asking Ben about the mayor. So my impression of the mayor is he's a great guy, and he's done a lot, and what's your impressions of the mayor of Lviv, Ben?
Well, like I will say, I'm a fan of Andriy Sadovy. And now I have to say, like every politician, some people, it doesn't matter where you are. There'll be people who like that politician, don't like that politician. But my view of him is that, and by the way, he's been the mayor there forever. I don't even know how long. And my view of him is that, and he says it. He doesn't say it in what we cut in the film, but he says it in something I left out, which he says, war changes you. And he really is dramatic when he says it. And because I asked him, and, I asked him, or in it, he says, he's been, actually, it's not in this. Previous to this, his house has been attacked by RPGs. A lot of mayors have been killed. And he says, this is my duty. And he says that then he says that war changes you. And when he said that, I really saw that he really meant it. He's no longer just like the mayor of Lviv, and like you deal with like, stray, dogs and like people complaining about the road or whatever it might be. And he explains what it takes, some of what it takes. He has to find, like, he has to keep the city going and he calls them his citizens, and the IDPs that come, he has to deal with them. And so actually being a politician, or being, like, we think about like whatever it is that they do as politicians, but from a practical standpoint, it's an enormous job to be a wartime mayor. And I think he really is so into it, and he really has his heart dedicated in it. And Lviv runs very well, I have to say. I mean, it runs really, really well, and it's because it could run badly, if things run well when you run them well. And I think he's doing a really good job during the war.
Yeah, all of what you said then basically is the impression I got when I saw. Well, it was, first of all, I think you sent me a clip before the film was released of him, and from that clip, and from the clip, obviously, it's in the film. That's where I get the passion he's got and the care. It's not like your typical politician saying what people want to hear and this kind of stuff. He really, he's got his job. He's happy in his job. Well, obviously not happy with what's going on, but he knows his role and he's embraced it 100%. And he looks very confident. He looks very composed as well. Looks as though he knows what he's talking about, and that when I saw that clip, it gave me a lot of confidence, especially well for Lviv anyway, that he was the top guy. So what?
Yeah,
Yeah, carry on.
yeah, Shaggy, in the film, I wanted to portray pretty much all of, as much as I could of all different aspects of life and people who are involved in keeping a country or a people going. So of course you have soldiers, and then you have like you have just regular people making sandwiches, like church people making sandwiches, and priests, and I mean the doctors. There's like the whole panel. I can't say the word of roles that people play in order to come together. Because as Yarko says at the beginning in the car, that everyone is a piece of this. Everyone is a piece of the puzzle. It's a big puzzle, and everybody's a piece of it. And so I wanted to get a politician into the film because that's really an important role in how things work. And so at some point, and I filmed him a few times, and then I was asked, like, who else do you want? Because I was thinking, I wanted to get maybe, and I asked, like, I was thinking, should I try to get Zelensky into the film, or like Duda, the president of Poland? And because there was more and more ability for me to have access. I don't know who would end up in. So I mean, sometimes it was hard to get people, but I didn't know. But I could go after somebody to try to get them in. And then, like, people kept asking me, "Do you want to film Zelensky for the film?" And I said, "Not really, because it would. I'm telling the story of the country, or the film is telling the story of the country, and if he's in it, it would kind of take away from all of the other people, probably, because it's like to throw the superstar in there. It's not about a superstar, and I mean, it would be great if he were in it, but I felt that from the standpoint of having a politician in the film as a role, I thought Andrei Sadovy, and I had already filmed him, really did the job, and I didn't need another politician in the film because it was he represents in a way the effort that all people who have responsibility for their sector, if you want to think of it that way. And so I was just happy to have him. And then he appears another time in the film, and at the funeral. We don't make a point of it, but you see him put flowers in the hearse. So yeah.
All right. Yeah. Thanks. No, it was a very, very, very good pick from that as well. I get what you mean about the celebrity politicians, but he came across as lots of integrity and honest, and a
But
really good fit.
but if anybody's listening to this, if Zelensky wants to be in my next one, I'll be. I'm not going to turn him down.
Well, I understand. We do have a couple of questions from the audience, if that's all right, chaps. Ben, actually, to you. Let me scroll through these. Got quite a few. So, a question from Mitch Ashdown: when editing, does the story itself just come natural, or do you kind of have to go after it somewhat?
You mean editing it, to put it together? Holy cow!
Yeah.
Many sleepless. If it's natural, I don't know why I have so many. I have to work so hard. No, editing is like we spent a year editing this thing. Filming it can take, filming it took a lot of time, but it didn't take a whole year to edit, but post production was a year. It's a huge job. I mean, if you want to be artistic about it, there's just so many decisions to make. One of it is you have all of this stuff. How do you keep it going as a story? And I'll quote Kubrick. Stanley Kubrick said that making a film is sort of like a symphony.
I believe that
In that
Vlad.
you have it's sort of like a symphony, in that there are different moods in it, and the audience gives you an amount of time to experience the film, and and if it's a great film, if it's a good film, you you bring a person along like in a symphony through different acts and different moods and different feelings, and that's all part of, and that happens in editing. Um, and then so that's like on the mega scale, like that's the grand scale, and then or the meta scale, and then individually, to do the like, there are basically, some of this are really music videos, and cutting a music video isn't necessarily, it takes a lot of thought, and then you have to put scenes, one scene follows another in some sort of thematic or some sort of emotional sense. um, there are a million decisions. It would be much easier to, by the way, to make a scripted movie than to make this documentary, because I sometimes God, I wish I had a script. It'd be so easy to follow and edit this thing, because we film so much, and then we got to figure out how to put it together.
If I could just ask you a quick question on this before we finish this segment, Ben. It seems like you made quite an intentional choice at the end of this scene, filming the. Can I call it the honey pie scene? Because she's making a honey pie.
Yeah,
sounds fair.
yeah. We call it honey cake. We actually do. We call it the honey cake sequence, or the honey cake scene.
It shows the isolation one person faces in the absence of a loved one. Her devotion to the task. It connects Vlad and this lady. I think you show the conditions Vlad lives in around like 45 minutes into the film, with the 24th in Bakhmut, if I'm not mistaken. But at the end of this, you choose a low angle shot, and this. I was thinking about why you choose to film her at the end with this lower angle, and
You mean that reverse shot, that shot with the on the end of the counter, that shot?
yes. It's like you give her this empowerment. You empower her, and the empowerment that her story deserves. You give that to her too. And strong characters usually get this type of shot. But even though she's emotional in this scene, she's strong. She's inspirational. Is that what shows it?
Yeah, well, there's a few things. One, as far as that camera angle goes, the one of the inspirations for the film, in order for it to be immersive in a way, is that in real life, if you watch a normal news report or documentary, the camera is pretty much head on whatever it's on, and there's very little foreground or background. The background may be blurred in some sense, but there's very little like stuff in the way, and in this film, if you look at it, there's almost always something blocking the frame, and there's a lot of imperfection. I had to teach the camera guys to not shoot beautifully, because it's like, hey, it's like square and it looks so good, and like there's nothing in the way. I said, no, we're going to put something in front of it, and it's like, we don't want to show the whole thing. We want to show pieces of the whole thing, because it's much more how life really is. And so when you go back, if you want to go back to that counter scene, I mean, and if you want to go back to the scene with the counter, or that shot with the counter, I don't know if you can, but so for that, yeah. So we called that actually the honey cam, because the camera was behind the honey, the pot of honey that she had. If you want to go back to it just a second. And and this is her kitchen. I mean, it's not a set. It's not easy to shoot like this in someone's kitchen. I mean, you think of your own kitchen, and like we have all of these angles and like the lighting. I mean, they did a great job. I mean, I had a great crew. But if you go back and you want to freeze frame it, or stop the frame, so this is a good example of like kind of the composition for those who care. You don't usually have all this crap in front of it, if you want to think of it that way, but you want to feel like you're in the kitchen with her, like it's like really making. So you want to, so you have kind of like you're there with her, in an imperfect, if you want to think about it, it's kind of beautifully framed, but it gives you that sense of her task, that we can cut from. And yeah, the camera was put there. We call this the honey cam, and the idea was for her. And like, when you're directing people, and we'd say, like, look at the honey cam, like turn your shoulder. Can you move your shoulder back and like she's talking to Vlad there in the honey camp, as we put it. And yeah, it was to make her feel. It was so that she would feel sort of like bigger in a way uh, by using that angle. But we didn't, and by intercutting it with all the things that she did, you feel her stature, but also you feel her task. And and then and so, yeah, there's so to answer the question about editing, this is a really, I have to, I don't usually say this, but this is a really well shot, really edited sequence that you have no concept of how much work it takes to do something like this. Remember, it's a documentary. This is not a scripted film. And like, we didn't tell her to make the cake. We just had to figure out how you're making the cake. And then we had to capture that.
To black here, you use the electricity, the oven going off, the power cut, and this obviously represents the reality that Ukrainians face, that you convey in your film, that the power can be cut at any time, whatever they're doing can cease, and you convey that very well, Ben. And we've gone a little bit over time. I'm really sorry. I know that all of us could speak to you for much longer. But I just want to say, before the next segment begins, thank you ever so much for coming on to Tochnyi. You're welcome back anytime. We and many others have a few hundred other questions about this film, which we'd really like to ask you.
Yeah, I'm happy to come back. I don't see the questions, but I didn't realize that there are other questions. I'm happy to come back whenever you want, and we can talk some more.
That's great. Okay, thank you, Ben.
Thanks a lot, Jonathan.
It's a pleasure. Thank you also, Shaggy, for being here.
Thanks for having me, and thank you, Ben, as well.
Always good to see you, Shag.
Okay, right. We are going to move on, everybody, to we've got a couple of things planned. Actually, we have the leaked Shahed documents and analysis of this, what this shows, what manufacturing materials the Russians have been using in their manufacture of Shahed drones. There's been quite a bit of information to come out of these documents. Their use of child labor included. But first of all, I'm going to hand over to Germinate to Ukraine, who I think has a short update for us, unless I've messed up the.
Yeah, you did actually, but no worries. Just for the viewers here, I attended the birthday party of my grandpa, and I didn't think I was coming back in time, so I didn't prepare anything. I will do a segment next week again and keep you updated.
Oh, it's great to hear that you're having an evening off at last. If you don't know, Germinate for Ukraine has, I'm sure you do know, he posts and researches every day on his literally what his name is, Germinate to Ukraine. So it gives me great pleasure to hand over to John and Joseph, who are going to talk about the enticing, interesting topic of the Shahed leaks. Over to you, John and Joseph.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Definitely a tough act to follow. Really great interview. It's really interesting to see Ben apply the craft of filmmaking to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, because I think it's we see a lot of interesting information about the war, but it's kind of a unique approach to understanding it, and I think it tells an important story, right? So tough act to follow, an audio-visual feast, right? We just have some stuff that we can show, that some documents basically. But so this week, I'm not going to do any news. I usually do a weekly news report, but luckily no important things happened in the Ukrainian general staff last week. We don't have to talk about any of that. So there's no news this week. No, I'm just kidding. But we have this interview. So I did skip the weekly news segment, but we are going to talk about the Shahed leaks because this was actually a fairly substantial set of information we got about it. And real quick, though, I wanted to get a couple things out of the way first. So, John, first off, how you doing, John?
I'm doing pretty well.
Wonderful to hear, John. So I just wanted to start with just a couple other things we talked a little bit about this week, just to maybe inform the listeners as far as you wanted. So there was a little bit of discussion about the Starlink stuff. So it started, I would say, as rumors on Telegram from both the Ukrainian and the Russian side that basically Russians are sort of using shell companies to buy Starlink terminals, and because the geofencing only works so well, they're basically able to use Starlink pretty effectively at this point in the war. So that started as rumors. It seems more or less that the Ukrainians are basically stating this out right now. And I think a lot of people are maybe under the impression to some extent that like the company itself maybe has more responsibility to crack down on this. So I'm just curious if there's any technical stuff you want to share with people, or I know you follow Starlink and the technology pretty closely, so I wanted you to share your thoughts on that. Go ahead.
So my understanding, just based upon some conversations with some friends, is that SpaceX is aware of the issue. They are trying to resolve it. Unfortunately, due to some rather technical and practical reasons, this is going to be a very difficult problem to approach. There is a minimum size to the cells, more or less, the roughly hexagonal cells that Starlink uses to more or less divvy up the surface of the Earth and determine whether or not service will be provided. Those cells are about 12 kilometers or so wide, which is pretty large on the scale of something like the front line in Ukraine, where you may have opposing Ukrainian and Russian trench lines, 1 to 2 kilometers apart. So, in terms of broad area access to Starlink, the issue is that for those areas for the Starlink's coverage cells that are along the front line, it's impossible to just broadly shut those off without also denying Starlink to Ukrainian users. So that's a problem. The issue on top of that is that, as far as I'm aware, I've talked to Jakub a little, or he posted some public stuff about this, and I've also talked to a couple people privately about it. As far as I'm aware, or any of us are aware, there is no centralized registry of Starlink terminals that are operated by the ZSU or the Ukrainian government more broadly, which poses an issue in that without such a registry, SpaceX can't go in and selectively blacklist terminals that aren't on, say, a whitelisted registry of terminals to provide service to. So that's another layer to the problem. Third layer is the rampant GNSS denial, GPS specifically, by both Russia and Ukraine along the front line. That makes it problematic for for SpaceX to estimate the location of each of the terminals and accurately locate it within one of those coverage cells. Again, that just makes this problem in terms of how do you go about denying the usage of Starlink to the Russians that much more problematic. And then finally, the ad hoc way in which these terminals and subscriptions have been secured in a lot of cases. Well, in Russia's case, they're purchasing the terminals abroad as well as paying for the subscriptions outside of Russia and then taking them into Ukraine. And while the Ukrainian government has been procuring Starlink terminals directly themselves via a number of sources, the Polish government, USA, the DoD, etc., a great many Ukrainian Starlink terminals have been purchased by volunteers, just at electronic stores or online directly from SpaceX, and many volunteers covered the subscription costs individually for units for a company or platoon, etc. And so the way the service is being provided to Ukraine's completely, the service and the terminals, I should say, are just completely fragmented. So unfortunately, there is no easy technical solution for how to approach this problem, at least in a short span of time.
Yeah, so I think in the short term, it's going to be very difficult. I would maybe say that Starlink as a company maybe has some sort of ethical responsibility to look into it and attempt a solution here, just because, it is a war and there are, lives at stake, and I would say American interests where the Starlink company is located. But I don't know, do you think like medium or long term there is a solution here? It's just going to take some time, or do you think that it's more just that this is maybe something we're going to have to deal with, is that Starlink is going to potentially be used by adversaries in the future? Go ahead, John.
So in the I don't have many future concerns about this outside Ukraine, because from a normal peacetime procurement standpoint, it's pretty simple for the DoD or the any allied or partner forces to just have centralized procurements of the terminals. Just have the DoD say, for example, order 100,000 Starlink terminals. They'll receive them in an organized, centralized way. They can create a centralized registry of terminals that are being operated by them, and then it becomes very easy for Starlink to whitelist those in service denied areas. And then it just becomes just a military issue of making sure you retain custody of those terminals, making sure they aren't lost, captured by the enemy, just like we do with cryptographic gear, other communications equipment as is. So nothing really out of the ordinary. So I wouldn't say it's a issue beyond Ukraine, just because once Starlink gets incorporated into the normal defense procurement cycle, that process in and of itself will mitigate or entirely eliminate most of these concerns. For Ukraine, the problem is going to be somewhat more intractable. The best approach would probably begin an effort to centralize the terminals and begin having units provide all the relevant serial numbers, SIM numbers, and all the other identifying information needed to create a centralized registry of terminals. That would probably be a several-month effort, just given the haphazard way in which these have been procured and operated. But that would be a starting point, at least. Try to go about maybe not fixing this entirely, but at least mitigating it.
Great, thanks, John. Any other stuff on Starlink, or we want to move on?
No, that's it.
Cool. So yeah, I think just I know you were mentioning some stuff about missiles this week, but I'll let you talk about anything you want to talk about that.
Right. So in terms of missiles, we got confirmation that GLSDB has been employed in combat. It has not been reported anywhere, really. I think the DoD may have made brief reference to it. There is a closed Russian Telegram channel that posted images of a tail fin assembly from a small diameter bomb allegedly recovered somewhere in Crimea. I don't have access to that Telegram channel, but a tiny Twitter account with like 10 people following it posted the images from that account. I don't have a link on hand, but suffice to say, we do now have visual confirmation that small diameter bomb, or ground launched small diameter bomb, I should say, has been deployed by Ukraine. So that's a positive development there. On the Russian side of things, in terms of missile deployments, there was some interesting news in terms of some wreckage that was recovered in Kyiv. There was a large metal assembly that was dug up from the dirt following a raid a couple days ago, or late last week. And it looked like there had essentially been like electro-penciled onto the metal assembly a Grau index, I should say, 3M22. For those who are not familiar with Russian missile designations, 3M22 is the Grau index corresponding to Zircon, which is Russia's hypersonic cruise missile system. It's a hypersonic anti-ship cruise missile specifically. Unlike Kinzhal, which is just an air-launched ballistic missile, it's just an air-launched Iskander-M. Despite Russian claims to the contrary, it's not hypersonic. Zircon, on the other hand, if it performs roughly as advertised, it is actually a hypersonic weapon. We don't have public confirmation that wreckage is actually from 3M22. One of the issues being that there are no reference images of Zircon publicly available. We have a small amount of test launch footage, but we've never actually gotten any clear video or images of the vehicle itself. That's just not available publicly, as far as I can tell. I've scoured the English and Russian language internet and Ukrainian language internet, and beyond like renderings and concept art, there's nothing to cross-reference this wreckage with. And what's interesting is that I believe this piece of wreckage was near identical to another set of wreckage that was recovered late last year, I believe on the 30th of December, again following a Russian raid. And that piece of wreckage also had, again, same identical metal subassembly. I can try and actually find an image to put up. That had also had 3M22 electro-penciled onto it. So that may indicate that if this is in fact Zircon, as the wreckage seems to lean towards, this would be an indicator that Russia has deployed it at least twice and has potentially become the first country to operationally employ a hypersonic cruise missile or just a hypersonic weapon in general, which was as it's interesting milestone for hypersonics engineering, unfortunately potentially made by Russia. So we'll have to see how this goes. If this does end up being Sarkhan, I'm not particularly concerned about it having a major impact. I don't suspect Russia has a particularly large stockpile of them, and their manufacturing capacity for them probably isn't very large. In terms of how it was launched, my assumption would be that it was from a vessel of the Black Sea Fleet. We don't know. There hasn't been a public indication that any of the vessels of the Black Sea Fleet have received the necessary upgrades to launch Sarkhan. In principle, the Admiral Grigorovich class frigates, they have the appropriate vertical launching system in terms of the cell is sized to fit Sarkhan. It's not clear publicly whether or not they received the combat management system upgrades that would be required to actually use the weapon. I suspect they are the most likely candidates, though, of any of the vessels in the Black Sea Fleet. There are also plans to eventually integrate Sarkhan with the Bastion complex, which Russia is a coastal missile system that Russia has deployed in Crimea. They've been previously using it to launch Onyx supersonic anti-ship missiles. That was in principle supposed to receive Sarkhan integration, but that would likely be farther out than just directly integrating on the Grigoroviches, which I suspect what happened. The missiles were likely drawn from either Northern Fleet stock or Pacific Fleet stock, if I had to guess, as they are the only two units that operate the Gorshkov class frigates, which were previously the only Russian surface combatants that are publicly acknowledged to have Sarkhan integrated.
Great, thanks, John. So I think now we move to our main topic for today. If we could pull up the pictures we have. So we'll maybe if we could go actually to like the third or the fourth image. There's like just like a weird picture in one of those slides. It's number 4, I think. Yes, I think this is maybe a good place to start. So John,
I'm going to start with just kind of at the beginning with the manufacturing process.
Yeah, well, I think let's start at the very beginning, right, John? So the IRGC got hacked by an Iranian hacker group, right? Would you say that's the beginning?
We don't know who actually got hacked. So there is a cyber threat group, the Prana Network. I've never heard of them. I have no idea who they're affiliated with. A lot of these groups are affiliated with state intelligence services of various countries. I've never heard of the Prana group. I have no idea if they're totally independent, if they're affiliated with a specific national government, sponsored by them. No idea. I have no idea who any of these people are. It isn't exactly clear who they hacked, if it was the IRGC or the Russians. It appears to be the Russians, given that most of the material is in Russian. There is some Farsi there as well as some English, but most of the material appears to be Russian, so I would assume they probably hacked Alabuga, which is the manufacturer, or the manufacturer of Russian localized Shaheds in Russia, rather than having hacked Hessa, which is the original Iranian manufacturer of the system.
Got it. That doesn't actually make more sense because, as you said, so the documents are like available online. They were leaked, right, by this group.
Correct. Yes, it was about 45 files, about 430 megabytes or so, and then 6.8 gigabytes of emails. I've gone through the files. I haven't fully translated all of them, but I've gone through all the files. I've gone through a couple dozen of the emails. I kind of stopped because there were like several hundred to maybe 1,000, 2,000 of them. And the couple dozen I read, they didn't really have any particularly useful information as far as I can tell. It looked to be mostly logistical stuff regarding China, Iran, and kind of just, we're going to ship 1,000 barrels of oil from point A to point B. It didn't appear to be immediately relevant. So I'm sure hopefully somebody goes through them in depth and sees if there's anything else interesting in there, but I didn't find anything additionally useful in there just at a glance.
Gotcha. Yeah. So, but yeah, they appear very authentic, I would say, based on my own experience with them. I mean, would you agree, John?
Yeah, they mostly, again, I don't want to stray into confirmation bias here, but They appear to be mostly consistent with other published information about the Shaheds. I had pinged some Ukrainian contacts about this, and they said that they appeared, well, they couldn't vouch for specific documentation. They said that the overall, the broad picture painted by these documents is correct as far as they're aware.
Yeah, like obviously we can't speak to every individual piece of information in the documents, but broadly speaking, it's a lot of documents. There's a lot of information there. There's blueprints to factories and, lots of in-depth photographic information of the manufacturing process. It would be quite an elaborate ruse to like fake all of it. But so yeah, just to speak to the veracity a little bit. So it outlines an arrangement, obviously, between some Russian companies and some Iranian companies about the manufacturing of Shahed drones, right, John? So we could maybe talk about the parameters of the arrangement or what we learned.
Right. So let's kind of start with the overall terms of the deal, then we can kind of go into the manufacturing aspect of it. That probably works a little bit better. So if you pull up the 4 images that I sent, the last one of which is in English, that would be a good place to start with the overall parameters of the sale from Iran to Russia.
So, John, I don't know if we have all the stuff. I don't know if I got that up in time. But if you
Okay.
go ahead and talk about it.
Right. So the overall parameters of this deal is that Iran would sell Russia, obviously Shaheds themselves, Shahed 131s and Shahed 136s directly, but they would also sell them the technology, equipment, source code, as well as provide training for Russia to manufacture them domestically. The total arrangement was for 6,000 Shahed vehicles. It doesn't differentiate between 131 and 136. The initial batches of those were provided directly from Iran. They were manufactured in Iran, with the rest on balance to be manufactured in Russia at the Alabuga plant in Tatarstan. So the total value of the deal is roughly 108 billion rubles, which works out to approximately $1.75 billion at the current exchange rate. This is extremely expensive, to put it mildly, not least because Russia is apparently paying the Iranian government in gold bullion presumably because the Iranian government will not accept rubles for rather obvious reasons. And I'm assuming Russia, for whatever reason, does not want to touch their US dollar denominated Forex reserves. So Russia's literally paying for Shaheds in solid gold. On top of this, it looks like Russia invested about 48 billion rubles in the actual plant itself in Russia, in Alabuga. They spent about 36 billion outfitting the plants, plus 12 billion rubles actually building the facilities and the complex itself. And then the cost of the 6,000 Shaheds, not just the unit cost, but this includes, I believe, the training, some of the software and other items, worked out to about 72 billion rubles. The actual per unit cost itself, for the order that they placed for those that were, again, coming directly from Iran, that were manufactured by HESA in Iran, worked out to about $193,000 per unit, so 12 million rubles, again, at the current exchange rate. The initial discussion was that Iran would provide them at 23 million rubles, or $375,000 per unit. In the course of the negotiations between Iran and Russia, the number of Shaheds included in the program was increased to 6,000, and that brought the unit price down initially to 18 million rubles, or $290,000 for 2,000 Shaheds, and then finally to the final number, which was again $193,000 for each for 6,000 Shaheds. And
So,
sorry, go ahead, Joseph.
Oh no, please go ahead.
So what I was going to say is that, for those who aren't familiar with how these things are priced, it's non-trivial to break down what's actually included in that unit price. A lot of people are saying it's all markup, it's all profit margin for the Iranians. That's probably not the case, but a lot of it's profit margin. This is enormously expensive for Russia. This is shockingly expensive, actually. This the cost for the initial lots of these that Russia was paying exceeded public estimates by about an order of magnitude, by a factor of 10. So this wildly exceeded my own estimates for how much they cost, and my estimates were already kind of on the high end for public estimates for the unit cost of a Shahed. The flip side of this, though, is that, and again, I put a slide up of it. I'm not sure if you can put it up on screen. It's the one with the graph of the number breakdown towards the end. The actual production cost for Russia, once localized, or rather the projected unit cost for localization in Russia, assuming no supply chain disruptions, works out to about 4.4 million rubles per unit, or about 48, well, let's say $50,000, call it even, for each Shahed. That's on the high end. Again, compared to the public estimates, I want to say the estimates from some Middle Eastern sources, when it was first deployed, and even the Shaheds that were deployed in the Middle East before the invasion of Ukraine began, they were estimating roughly $20,000 to $30,000 per unit. Again, those produced locally in Russia worked out to about double that, which was a little bit around what I was expecting personally. About $50,000, which is not really great for the capability that you get. It's cheaper than a large number of surface-to-air missiles. I mean, it's cheaper than a Stinger, for example, which costs about $100,000 a unit. It's cheaper than AIM-9X Sidewinder, which costs about $400,000. But at the same time, we have, they're in the West anyways, in the United States specifically, we do have things like APKWS, Advanced Precision Kill Weapon System, that cost about $25,000 per unit. And again, even Stinger, given how many we can manufacture at scale, and just given the size of our economy or other Western economies, even though it costs double that of a Shahed, we can still just produce a lot of them, and the cost ratio kind of just doesn't matter at that point. So the exchange cost for the overall conclusion to take away from this is that the cost exchange ratio for Russia employing the Shaheds is much less favorable than many people on the internet and in other defense communities were thinking it would be. This is I would say it's a barely positive exchange for Russia that can easily get drowned out by other factors such as just raw production capacity of countermeasures.
Wonderful, John. I think that answered all the questions I had about the arrangement itself. Is there anything else about the arrangement that you wanted to?
So we don't know how much Russia has actually paid Iran as of yet. There is a press statement that's in there's looks like honestly a bank statement. There's a record of a financial transaction, half in Russian, half in Farsi, that references the use of gold bullion. Isn't the full 1.75 billion. It looks like just an individual payment, but that's what we're taking as evidence that it is being paid in gold bullion. The fact that we have evidence of an individual payment made in gold. And that's what I'd say about the overall agreement, which kind of transitions us to our the next aspect of this, which is that this encompasses more than just the Shahed 136 that we're familiar with. So how it started out is that Iran offered.
Real quick, John. I knew, so we had so many documents, and I was like, I couldn't come up with a good system to have the documents on hand that we needed specifically because they're all in Russian, But so for the manufacturing process, I made sure we have the whole PDF, all 200 pages of it, John. So if you ever want a page of that, please just let us know, and we'll bring it up. But if you could bring up the manufacturing production PDF, appreciate it. Go ahead, John. Sorry.
Right. So how this started out is that Iran offered the Shahed platform, so to speak, as a product to Russia. So Russia has adopted the Shahed 136 for all practical purposes. However, they weren't initially offered just the 136. They were offered the 136 and the 131, the 131 being more or less the overall characteristics are similar, except that it's smaller and somewhat shorter range. We haven't seen Shahed 131s in probably a year. Russia deployed them as the Jiran 1 with the 136 being the Jiran 2. Russia deployed them both initially, and then we stopped seeing the Jiran 1 after a little while. And these documents actually internally reflect that, as they reference Russia, after having employed both of them in Ukraine, they reached the decision that to standardize on the 136, that the 131 was not something they were interested in. So that 6,000 units of just Shaheds became 6,000 Shahed 136s. And there's also references to other Shahed products, including Shahed 136 derivatives, like the 236 and then the 237 and the 238. I'll get to that in a little bit. But we should probably go over the manufacturing process just a little bit to give people a sense of what's actually going on here and why these leaks are so interesting. So, I mean, feel free to pull up any page of the PDF. Doesn't really matter.
Yes, I'm talking to the back-end people as we speak, John. Please begin your discussion of the manufacturing process. Thank you.
Yes. So what this PDF depicts is the composite layup process for the Shahed airframe. It doesn't. There's other parts of the manufacturing process. The PDF is not a complete description. It's just the production of the airframe itself. So what we can see is them, the geometry of the molds they're using and the process through which they're putting down those composite layers in the mold, binding them together with epoxy, doing the vacuum bagging and sealing to cure the epoxy, and then how the actual buildup of the airframe structure itself. That's really what we're seeing here. And so there's some very good images of it. We can see the process through which they're mixing the chemicals, they're preparing the epoxy, the binders, through which they're cutting and trimming the carbon layers, laying down the aviation plywood, designing the fins, actually the curing process. The PDF is rather comprehensive. We have broad dimensions for a lot of the airframe. And then towards the end, we can see the process through which they install the aramid fiber, which is essentially a type of synthetic fiber. Think of like Kevlar, for example. It's an aramid fiber. The process through which they install that aramid fiber, essentially structural cage inside the airframe, it's a rather comprehensive. I've shared this with a bunch of friends who work in various fields of engineering, and they're all very, very delighted to see this. It's an incredible amount of insight into how the Russians approach the process. One thing to note about it is that in general, doing composite layups is very labor intensive for non-regular geometries. And by non-regular, I mean things that essentially they're not spherical, they're not cylindrical, they're not, cubic, for example. So anything that's not a regular geometric solid, it's very difficult to automate that process. It can be done. There's ways to do it to reduce the amount of man labor that has to go into it. You can do things like premix binders and other curing agents and then refrigerate them. You can pre-impregnate parts with those binders and agents and then refrigerate them. All of those things add complexity and cost, and it looks like the Russians more or less directly copied the Iranian manufacturing method, which is, again, to just do all of this by hand. And so, as you can see, they're applying the binder, the epoxies. They're cutting all these little pieces by hand, using the little bags, etc.
Yeah, I think it speaks to I don't know, like a pretty thoroughly documented process, but a fairly primitive manufacturing process. Would you agree?
Yes,
John,
I mean,
or what do you think?
I would say, well, it's primitive, but this is the industry standard, I would say, for this type of composite layup that you aren't doing at an enormous scale. There are ways to automate it when you're, again, dealing with non-regular geometries, as you are here with this type of airframe. But the equipment that you need for that is very, very expensive, and it's probably difficult for Russia to get their hands on some of it, given the sanctions regime. And there's one of the things that's also described in the avionics, I'm talking about the documents, is the actual Iranian manufacturing process and how they've structured it industrially. And it seems pretty clear that they went for this process because it's simple, because they don't have, because they don't need to import all this machine tooling to do it. They can do it locally with just labor. and they can source 90% of the components locally in Iran, the remaining 10% presumably being mostly microelectronics, as well as I would suspect those aramid fibers, which Russia themselves are sourcing from China. And the Russians themselves have been able to localize all of the airframe components except for those aramid fibers that are used for that internal structural cage, if you will. So yeah, again, this is a process that's designed for simplicity, and Russia probably doesn't have easy access to the means to automate it. At the same time, if you have a very large available labor pool, then this is something that you can get away with. It's not efficient, but if you have people to just throw out the problem, it's not particularly skilled labor. Obviously, the people that are doing this are going to require some level of training, but this isn't something you need, particularly skilled engineers or technicians to run the line on a daily basis.
Whose mic is that? Is it yours, John?
That's not mine.
Can we mute whoever that is? Okay, so John, yeah, thank you for the discussion of the manufacturing process. I guess maybe the one question I have is like, is there an ability to scale up here for the Russians, right? I mean, you already mentioned the cost is kind of astronomical because A, Iran's fleecing them left and right, and B, I think you kind of laid out, like, they're not really producing these things in like a modern, like, industrial way. They kind of require some finessing here to get what they need done.
So in terms of scaling, so the current target for the plant, and I have this documented somewhere. The projected target for the manufacturing capacity at the Alabuga plant was about 220 units a month in terms of Shahed production. That works out to about 2,600 annually. So that's their current target. They're likely have met that. So they're likely producing, I'd say, 200 to 250 of these of the Shaheds a month. One interesting thing about the deal, though, is that I'm not sure if you can pull up the picture of the translated version I sent earlier. That was the target by 2024, 2025. Again, about 2,600 annually. The Russians, though, per the terms of this agreement, plan to go beyond the original 6,000 and scale to produce 10,000 per year locally on, presumably on a 2026, 2027, 2028 timescale.
Got it. And I don't know, do you think that's basically feasible with the
That's definitely feasible. I mean, the Shahed is a very simple design fundamentally. The cost exchange ratio isn't great for it just because of a variety of different factors related to, cheap threats have cheap countermeasures. That axiom is almost invariably true. But at the end of the day, it's still something that's fairly inexpensive and easy for Russia to manufacture. What's, I guess, of more interest is the Shahed derivatives, specifically the 236 series and the 237/238 series. So, and this is where we get to the really, really funny part in terms of costs. So the 236, the designations here are a bit muddy. The documents refer to them as the M236 and the MS236, and they appear to be identical to the baseline Shahed 136 in every way except for two important ways. So again, I put images in the chat. If you can find a way to get those up, that would be appreciated to give people a better sense of what we're talking about. It would be the second set of images that I sent. The MS236 is essentially just a Shahed 136 with a terminal seeker and a data link added to it. It looks like an optical infrared seeker with a data link that allows an operator to control it in flight. And it has a line of sight data link, so that limits its range based upon terrain and the curvature of the Earth. So the MS236 is to be paired with a M236, which is just a baseline Shahed 136 modified to have a relay system on board. So the MS236 would transmit its data link that allows it to connect with the operator to the M236, and then the M236 would then relay it back to the ground station. And so that gives them an overall range of about 220 kilometers for use of that complex together. So that would be for the use against tactical targets like vehicles, air defense systems. This would essentially be transforming the Shahed platform from a one-way attack UAV, to use the term of art, which is a funny way of saying a cheap bootleg cruise missile, to an actual true loitering munition for use in tactical operational context. And what's particularly funny here about this is the cost. So they were looking to order ones manufactured in Iran, and they were looking to order specifically 2,000 of the 236 Seeker versions, and then an undisclosed number of the corresponding relay versions. But the unit cost for the Seeker version is $900,000, which is unbelievable. To give context for some people, an AGM-158 joint air-to-surface standoff munition, which is a very low observable air-launched cruise missile, the standard used by the United States, costs $900,000. So for a Shahed, a $50,000 UAV with a terminal seeker, they are paying as much as the United States does for 1,000-kilometer range, very low observable cruise missile. And on top of that, that's more expensive than Caliber or KH-101. So for whatever reason, Russia has made the decision to buy 2,000 Shaheds, 2,000 Seeker equipped Shaheds at a cost greater than their own cruise missile systems, which is bizarre. It's hysterical because they should not cost. Well, it's hysterical for two reasons. A, these should not cost $900,000. Obviously, not all of that is markup. Some of that will no doubt go into actually supporting the Iranian production line, but a very large percentage of that is markup. It's margin, profit margin for the Iranian government. And really, no matter how generous you are in terms of what percentage of that's going back into the Iranian manufacturing line, the Iranians are absolutely robbing the Russians blind. This is an insane price. This is I'm going to go out on a limb and say this is the most ridiculous price arrangement I've ever seen in a defense contract, like published in the past 2 decades. It's absurd. It's genuinely absurd. And then on top of that, there is a further evolution of the Shahed, variously known as the Shahed 237 or the 238. In these documents, it's references the 237. In the public exhibitions that Iran has done, it's references the 238. My hypothesis is that the distinction between them is a seeker. So essentially, what fundamentally the 237 and the 238 are is they're a Shahed airframe with turbojet propulsion, replacing the piston engine propeller propulsion on the baseline Shahed. So that cuts your range in half from about 2,000 to 1,000 kilometers, but it takes your cruising speed up from about 150 kilometers per hour to about 600, so more comparable to an actual cruise missile. My hypothesis is that 237 references the version without a seeker, and 238 is the version with a seeker. The latter is what has been advertised by Iran. The former is what's referenced in these documents as what Russia's interested in procuring. And they make reference to Russia planning to buy 677 Shahed 237s for a unit price of $1.4 million, which, again, I stress, is they're getting a bootleg cruise missile at a cost greater than, a comparable to the standard U.S. cruise missile, and that's probably, 150 to 175% the cost of their own Caliber and KH-101. It defies belief that they have decided to move forward with this arrangement. My working theory is that the Russians want speed. The Russians want these delivered soon, and that they're willing to pay Iran ridiculous to pay Iran's absurd pricing because they are unable to scale their own domestic cruise missile production in the time frame that they want to. My guess would be that they're probably having issues with their own domestic turbojet production, the TRD-D50 for KH-101 and caliber, as well as the Skander K. And they don't think that they can resolve those problems in the time frame that they want to, so they're willing to pay Iran truly gratuitous sums of money to get the Shaheds, because Iran can deliver them and they can stand up production of the Shaheds locally, as well as, again, import the enhanced Shaheds, if you will, from Iran directly on a shorter time frame that's more in line with the Russians want. And again, just kind of put the total program costs into perspective here. $1.75 billion. If you go back and look at some of the program history here from the US side of things and adjust for inflation, all of that, that's, again, almost as much as it costs us to develop JASSM. So again, Iran is buying kind of not fantastic UAVs for the same price it costs the United States to develop what's arguably the world's most sophisticated air-launched cruise missile currently in service. It's just such a this entire deal is such a bizarre expression of military industrial policy in a wartime environment that I'm honestly not quite sure how to approach it. It's just so strange on so many levels.
It is, John. Now we're running a little low on time here, and we got another section to get through here. So thank you for the discussion of the manufacturing. I think the point is clear, right, on both the arrangement itself and the manufacturing process. That Russia's getting gouged, which is good news. Everything we've presented so far has been fairly straightforward and logical, but this wouldn't be a story about Russia without something depressing and strange and cringe. Now we get to that part. So if we could close this document and go back to the PowerPoint, please, Mr. Technical Man. Thank you very much for our technical people helping present many technical things. Okay, so if we go to the first slide, thank you. So this shows who's actually building the drones, John, and it's somehow, so one thing I should mention, a lot of this came out in the Russian press. Certain journalists were leaking information about this in Russian language press for a while, but this document basically confirms that stuff. So I don't want to pretend that this is completely new information, but it's still absolutely horrifying, and it is confirmed, so we're sharing it. So John, if you want to talk about who's actually making this stuff, go ahead.
Right. So the plan, keep in mind, these documents, we don't know the exact date, but they're likely, this specific presentation is likely from sometime early 2023. So the composition, the staffing of the plant has probably changed. It's probably grown in size. It's almost certainly grown in size since then. But what this slide provides us with is a breakdown of the number of employees for different teams, essentially, and the number of employees needed, and sort of what their background is. And so what's interesting about this is that my understanding, both the machine translation, I also got the help of a couple of native Russian speakers to help me translate and interpret this, is as of the date of this document, which again, roughly estimating is probably mid to early 2023, there are 286 people employed at this plant. And what's interesting and disturbing about this is that it references 175 of them being college students. So cross-referencing this with other local Russian media reports from essentially since summer of last year, we know this refers to Alabuga Polytechnical College, which is sort of a local Russian college near where this plant is located in Tatarstan. And what's interesting is you have to understand how the Russian schooling system works. And the key aspect of it is that college in Russia refers to really a younger age group than, say, what would be familiar with here in the United States or in Europe. And it really refers to, at the lower end, 15 to 16-year-olds and 17 to 18-year-olds on the higher end. And so, in other words, what it looks like has occurred is that essentially a bunch of these local college students, quote unquote, again, mostly 15 to 16-year-olds, some 17 to 18-year-olds, have been given semi-voluntary internships to work at this plant. And this isn't explicitly referenced in the documents, but the way it was explained to me by a couple Ukrainian friends, how the Soviet Russian schooling system works is that these internships are considered semi-voluntary. The anecdote I was given was they're considered semi-voluntary in the same way that taking an exam is semi-voluntary. You can technically refuse, but it's gonna jack you up. And there's usually also financial penalties that are associated with dropping out if you also decline one of these internships, on the order of like 100 to 200,000 rubles. So more or less, these college students, they have been told to go work at the plant, and if they refuse, they will basically be kicked out of school and financially penalized in one of Russia's poorest regions, I might add, 100 to 200,000 rubles, which is probably more than a year's salary. And on top of this, they're barely getting paid to work there. So I'm not sure if you have the actual pay scale slide up. That would be very helpful, because it's kind of complex. Let's see if we can get that up.
Yeah, slide number 2, please. That
So
one.
how they've divided this pay scale, and this is the second gross part of all of this, besides the de facto child labor, is they're being given a base salary of 3,000 rubles a month. I'm not going to bother with the USD conversions because cost of living in Russia is much less. I don't actually know the cost of living in Tatarstan off the top of my head, but this probably is insufficient, to put it mildly. So the base pay is 3,000 rubles, and then essentially what it looks like is that employees, the interns, the quote unquote interns, and then the non-interns are essentially forced to compete against each other, and the most productive are given pay bonuses according to this, I guess, pay scale. The categories are wood, bronze, silver, and gold. Wood gets no pay bonus. Bronze gets a 4,000 ruble a month pay bonus for non-interns, and a 2,000 ruble a month bonus for quote unquote interns. Silver is a 13,000 ruble bonus for non-interns, and a 6,500 ruble bonus for quote unquote interns. And finally, gold is a 35,000 ruble monthly bonus, and then 9,000 ruble bonus for the, again, quote unquote interns. That's not a lot, again, to live on in this region. And moreover, I would note that 25% of the students, well, they're getting no bonus because they're in the wood category. So they get 3,000 rubles a month to live on, which is very questionable. And then another 50% that are in the bronze category get 5,000 rubles a month, including the bonus, that makes about 75% of them. So more or less, we're at the stage where a majority, 60% of the workforce at the Shahed plant, as of whenever this document was created, again, mid to early 2023, is being produced by de facto child labor, 60% of the people there. And then on top of that, we can go back to the previous slide. You'll notice a reference to Tajiks and mulattoes. It took me a while to figure out what this is, but in consultation again with some friends who are native Russian speakers, it looks like Tajik refers to Central Asian migrant laborers, and mulattoes to African migrant laborers. And given sort of the nature of how migrant labor works in Russia, there's a very significant probability that that a fair number of them were either trafficked or lured to work in Russia under false premises or pretenses. And they make up about 25% of the workforce. So again, we have the Shaheds, the workforce that manufactures the Shaheds is 60% underage students who are more or less being forced to work there. And then it's 25% migrant workers, which is very off-putting, to put it mildly.
And I just want to get meth chemists out of the way. I'm a little disappointed no one in chat brought this up. It's a mistranslation. We assume it's metallurgist, right, John?
Yeah, metallurgist, or that was the. I talked to two native speaker friends. They couldn't quite agree on what it meant, but they thought it meant either like material chemists or metallurgists or metallurgy chemists or something to that effect.
Yeah, some kind of expert on probably the material that it's made from, right? The plastic.
Yes. These would be the actual some of the senior engineers running the plant.
Yeah, so I think like the in conclusion, to the horrifying part of this is it's, as you said, they're being produced by what, 60% child labor of questionable. Like I had some rough student jobs and I've heard of some rough internships, but gee whiz. And then the other what, 30% is human
20%.
trafficking.
Yeah, essentially.
Yeah, so it's
so uniquely Russian.
Yeah, uniquely Russian endeavor to produce these things. And I don't know, John. I mean, is there anything else we wanted people to take away from this aside from being disgusted and horrified by Russia's continuing efforts to terrorize the Ukrainian population and somehow finding ways to find new bottoms to do so?
I don't think there's any other takeaways at this time. This is, I mean, it's a pretty comprehensive set of information. A couple of friends of mine are working on like a full cost analysis based upon this. I don't think they've published it yet, but I will quote, tweet, or retweet that on my timeline whenever my friend who's an engineer finishes his analysis on this.
Yeah, thanks, John. Do you have any other like concluding thoughts on this topic? I think we're basically wrapping up here.
No, I don't believe so. Again, the materials are available online. I have a link to the original, like the repository released by the hackers that has all the original material. That's the original release, the link they released it on. I don't know if there's any, I guess I downloaded it safely without issue. A bunch of my friends downloaded it safely without any apparent issues, but I would not want to distribute that link publicly. Just out of caution and not wanting to have random people on the internet, interface with very questionable links from cyber threat actors. So I'm not sure if there's any safe link currently available or any safe upload of these publicly online. People can access if they want to go look at them themselves. If I find anything like that somebody else has uploaded on like Cloudflare or something, I'll post that on my timeline.
Wonderful, thank you, John. So yeah, that's the Shahed leaks, everyone. Very interesting stuff. I want to thank John and all the people who were helping him out and involved, I should say, in the collaborative effort to translate and kind of understand the context that the documents came out of. Very interesting stuff and equally horrifying. So thanks for John. Jonathan, I think we're about ready to wrap up. I guess real quick, though, we wanted to maybe talk about just a little bit of good news about our feature in The Economist. Daniela, real quick, I mean, did you just want to talk about, I know, so for people who don't know, we had Daniela's work at Tochnyi, which is fantastic. He logs all the drone strikes that Andrew Perpetua is collecting and sort of aggregates that information and displays the information, the aggregated information, so we can draw analysis from it, right? And so The Economist approached Daniela about featuring that information in an article they did, and it was published last week. So Daniela, did you have to say about that before we wrap up?
Daniela?
Now hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you now, buddy.
Yeah, sorry. I just updated the Mac OS and it changed all my setting. Anyway, yeah, it was a very nice interaction, and they have been very professional. I transmitted all the data and all the analysis that I have done, and they integrated beautifully in the paper that they published, in the article that they published, which essentially included a lot of other contribution. To be honest, it's not only us, but most of the data, if not all the data that about the strikes, is from the work that I've done with the data collected by Geek and Andrew. So yeah, it was a very nice use of all those detailed information that we often publish. So I'm very happy that this happened. And furthermore, in the next few days, I'm going to continue to work on this data. I published just a few days ago an update. If you go on my profile, I think it's one of my last thread about the FPV usage. and there you can find the latest figure. I don't know if you want to go over them, or we can just discuss these in another time, maybe, because it's too late. It's very late today. Up to you.
Yeah, I think it's a little late today, but maybe
Yeah.
next week, can we do it?
Yeah, of course.
Cool. Beautiful. Okay, so yeah, I think we're gonna wrap up here, but yeah, really congratulations, Daniela, for getting the research from Tochnyi, I should say, featured in The Economist. It's really fantastic news. As I've often mentioned, like the whole goal of Tochnyi, and when we started, we see like a lot of like bad information or misinformation or just kind of like amateur, takes on Ukraine a lot, and we're doing our best to try to sort through all that noise for people and bring them accurate information, and then they can do with it what they want, right? And so to have just kind of the raw data about the strikes published in The Economist, where I think a lot of people that wouldn't otherwise read our work is going to read it, and to have them take that information and kind of do something with it, that's really like what it's all about for me. So really congratulations, Daniela, and I'm really proud of the whole team for keeping everything working at Tochnyi so that such things are possible. And great interview today from Jonathan as well. So Jonathan, I think we're wrapping up, so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, buddy. Unless I think you have picture of the week, and if you want to do the outro, or I can go ahead.
Thanks, Joseph. We've got our picture of the week. It is taken from Ben Goldhagen's remarkable film. And so thank you, everyone, for joining us. Andrew Perpetua's stream is starting about now. We thoroughly recommend it. Please do check out the Economist article, as Joseph and Daniela just noted. Perseverance is that secret of all triumphs, embodied in the Ukrainian achievements we witness and conveyed, I think, through Ben Goldhagen's film that we saw today. Ukrainians persevere as we approach the second anniversary of this devastating full-scale invasion of their country that has changed so many lives. Thank you for joining Tochnyi once again. Please check in again next week. We will be here. Slava Ukraini.
Heroyam Slava.
Heroyam Slava.
On behalf of the brave.